Welcome to Collective Soulversations. I'm Jodi Jones, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this amazing journey exploring spirituality, healing, and personal growth. With over 15 years of experience as a psychic medium and energy healer, I've made it my mission to help people connect with their true selves, and I can't wait to share this journey with you. In every episode, I chat with incredible guests who bring their own unique stories and insights to the table. We dive into different tools and practices that can help support you on your path of self discovery. So, whether you're just starting out or you've been in this journey for a while, Collective Soulversations is all about creating a friendly and welcoming space for us to explore the mysteries of the soul together. So, grab your favorite cup of tea, get comfy, and let's dive into this enlightening adventure together. Hey, everybody, welcome to Collective Soulversations. I'm your host, Jodi Jones, and I have a wonderful guest with me today. I have Mr. Gary Diggins in the house. Yay! So, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Gary so you can know a little bit about him, and then we'll dig in and get into the juicy stuff with Gary. So, Gary Diggins began his musical career in the Detroit area, working as an opening act for performers ranging from Alice Cooper to Sly and the Family Stone. I did not know that. That's so cool. In his early 20s, Gary met a Colombian shaman that he encountered, and it shifted his orientation from the performing arts to a study of the healing arts. For the past 4 decades, he has maintained an expressive arts practice that blends the therapeutic use of sound with spiritual director counseling. He calls his work sound work as soul work. As an educator, Gary has taught internationally at various leading institutes and universities. Gary has written 5 books related to music as medicine. His current guidebook is entitled Liminality Traversing the In Between. And I just looked that up online so you guys can buy it online. Gary plays a range of acoustic instruments collected from around the world. His musical collaborations have taken him to India, Africa, Europe, South Korea, Israel, and throughout North America, including a performance at New York's Carnegie Hall. Gary and his family currently live on a rural property near Meaford, Ontario, with 3 cats and a dog named Sita. Well, welcome, Gary. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Jody. And I like that little we're going to dig in. I think that was a kind of reference to my name that,
I know, right?
that I came with.
Yeah, for sure. So I have known you for many years, but this is the first time that we are actually interacting with each other in this kind of way, which is kind of cool. So I'm I I'm excited because I do know things about you, but as I tune into your energy, I feel like there's like much more that we can explore together. So let us know, because of what you do now, I feel like we want to hear like your story of like how did you get here? Like how did you're not just working a 9 to 5 job someplace. You've made music and sound healing as your career, right? You're writing about it, you're teaching, you're sharing. So take us back in time a little bit and let us know like when things started to shift and change for you, when you felt the calling or the pull.
Yeah, great question, by the way. Um, so I can't claim to fully understand the process of incarnation as to why I was dropped in the Canadian city of Windsor, Ontario, but there I was. And specifically, I was born into a family that had that musical context. My father was a jazz musician, and all of us were encouraged to study more formal music. So I grew up playing trumpet mainly in orchestral settings and in concert bands and whatnot. But living across from Detroit, inevitably the airwaves were charged and floating across with wonderful music, ranging from the sounds of Motown to I would listen to Martha Jean, the Queen, on Sunday nights, and she would be interviewing Aretha Franklin, for example, right?
Cool.
So that kind of oriented me toward a style of music that I would have called even back then soul music. So I kind of feel that as individuals, we're wired with these dreams and passions and gifts and aptitudes that have a lot to do with our soul's callings. And that fascinates me because I feel from a psychological standpoint that often the symptomatic things that people present have a lot to do with either a disconnect or a struggle to align with their soul's calling, right? What they're here
Yeah.
to contribute, both in terms of a personal, but also in a larger collective sense. So anyway, I got on this path of performing with it was an eight-piece band, very different than the Detroit scene at that time in the late 60s. There was a lot of free punk music like the MC5s and Iggy and the Stooges, and we'd work with these amazing artists. So I got at a very young age, at 19, I had already performed in all the major venues in Detroit and gone out on the road. And I found it fulfilling to perform, but the entertainment industry was not a healthy environment for
Right.
me. There was a lot of drug abuse. There was a lot of egotistical shenanigans that come with that package.
Mhm.
So fortunately, as you mentioned in the intro, I came across a man who had nothing to do with that kind of culture. He came from the deep legacy of a shamanic practice in Colombia. And it was a classic kind of soul setup, if I could put it that way, where you've got, I'm living my dream on one hand, and on the other hand, is this really my dream? That there are
Right.
other dreams, right? And I think that's part of soul work, that we have to reconcile those uh, polar opposites to find the third thing, as Rumi says, out beyond right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there.
Right.
So that began really an investigation into what older cultures have done through vocal and instrumental expression, using that in rites of passage, using that in times of mourning, using that as a kind of way of pulling the society together, but also connecting that in a deep spiritual way with the forces of nature and the departed ones.
Mhm.
So my journey then kind of did a little bit of a weaving between academic studies in terms of psychology and the early pinnings of music therapy back then. But I learned a lot through indigenous elders who would kind of open up um, really that rich way of using sound in an intentional context. So that's
Yeah,
kind
very
of how I
powerful.
got on the path.
Yeah, I love that. And it just, I was being shown that I mean, you understand this now, the power of using music for healing, right? For sound therapy, for and it's interesting when you talk about, the whole music industry and how it is kind of clouded in darkness, right? With addictions and ego and, all of that. But they were showing me that it's intuitively within all of us that, wanting and need to use music to heal, right? So the people that are in the music industry that are having the biggest struggles, with the addictions and the drama, the trauma, all of that, they're being called to the music scene because they feel the calling of the vibration of the potential to heal, right? The potentiality for that. And obviously, if they've got a lot of stuff to work on, it doesn't just go like I show up and now I'm healed. Right? But it's interesting that how they showed me that intuitiveness of us to go to music for healing when we need healing, because we know intuitively the vibrational frequency of music can heal us for sure.
Yes, I saw so many vivid examples of that, especially when I was working for a non-for-profit organization called Mindfulness Without Borders, and their intent was to bring practices of mindfulness, especially to communities that have been affected by conflict and violence in certain countries of Africa. So we worked with the genocide survivors in Rwanda, former child soldiers in Uganda, and a conflict zone up in northern Nigeria. And in all those places, as you've just said, Jodi, the expressive arts, especially of music, was integral to the kind of healing of trauma.
Mhm.
I saw this especially working in the Gulu region of northern Uganda. So these were kids who were abducted young in life and forced to commit terrible atrocities. So when they either escaped from the LRA, the Lord's Resistant Army, or they were captured by the Ugandan forces, they couldn't return to their villages. So there was this wonderful visionary who created a place called Hope North, and Sam Okello gave a place for hundreds of these young people to regain an education, but more importantly, to heal. And I partook in these amazing ceremonies where through dancing, through drumming, and through long cycles into the evening and well into almost the period of dawn, there would be this entranced experience where um, the energy of sound and the interaction of souls created a palpable medicine. I mean, you could just
Right.
feel it. You could feel it. And so, as a Westerner moving into those contexts, I realized that I didn't need to import or impose anything, but to be a kind of verification of what was happening, to witness that, and to also find some ways that that could be embedded with some mindfulness practices like that. But um, even though music therapy is growing in popularity, etc., the practice of that in terms of shamans and medicine women goes back time immemorial. Some people
Mhm.
say that long before we had words, we had sounds and ritual experiences around chant and those early instruments.
Yeah, and it's so cool because they were just saying to me as you were talking that there was no formal language used when you're using music for healing. So there's no way to convolute it, to change the meaning of it, right? How, you know, there's some words that we use that have so many different meanings depending on the inflection you put into it. But with the music, it's very true and pure, right? It's like frequency, it can't lie. Like frequency, it is what it is.
Right.
Yeah, that's so cool. So let
Yeah,
me know
in terms of
because
voice too,
yeah,
just to riff off that a little bit,
yeah,
um, a lot of the older cultures will have a type of language that's used in ceremony in terms of either a vocalization or a chant
right.
that has no tethering to nouns and verbs and their local language. It's more of a we call it in ethnomusicology vocables. So it's an impressionistic language that isn't tied down to the manifest world. It's a way of using the voice in an invocative kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Ah, semelikoa, iye, tumaka, sele. So it comes almost like a jazz musician would improvise.
Right. Right.
It's a spiritual transmission, as it were, in the moment.
Yeah, it's so cool that I that you, our my guides and your guides are like in sync because they're like giving it like as you're so as you were talking again, they were saying to me the the light codes, the light. Have you heard of people using that? The light language they call it. So their light language, and it's exactly what you just did there in a minute. That's so when they're doing it, is the idea is that they're channeling energy, right? They're using it through this. And when I first heard it, which was several years ago, it was very interesting because I felt a familiarness to it. Like I had heard it, but when you if you listen to it, and maybe we'll get you to riff a little bit of it again, it's like there's like so many different languages in it blending and like dialects and like all of the it's like this massive collection that you can't sit there and go, "Oh, that's a German accent. Oh, that's a Do you know what I mean? Like it's just fully encompassing, which is so cool that you just riffed some light language for us.
Yeah, and it's very chameleon-like.
Yeah.
So if somebody's presenting in a way that's rooted in uh, trauma or grief or anger, the light language, as it were, can shift and adapt. So it's really something that comes through particularly for that individual in that context, in that time, right?
Yeah.
So rather than codifying it and saying, this is what we ought to do in this kind of situation, instead, we have to hold it lightly. And as a sound work practitioner, really be open to what wants to emerge in the moment. It's not formulaic.
Yeah. And so go a little bit further because you when you I don't what you called it, but you obviously there's a formal teaching of this, like they're teaching it in right. I had no idea about that. I just thought that there were these channelers, people that I know, that all of a sudden they woke up one day and the light language was activated in them. But tell me what is like the formal beginnings of it as far as you understand.
Yeah, so in my own work, in my own teaching, I teach vocables, and that is really about being more transparent. And, musicians talk about, I play music. This is just the opposite. It's being played by music, right?
Right.
Muses are beginning to move through. And so it requires a kind of putting aside of the ego that is often concerned about performative techniques. How do I sound? Am I in tune? What will people think of this? All that kind of mental chatter. And instead, there's a kind of openness to being used, being employed in this kind of way. So one of the entrances that I found to teach this is to just have people work with breath alone, as if they were shaping the exhalation in an impressionistic painting kind of way, like very much like we might be standing in a forest and a gust of wind comes through and begins to move the grasses and the leaves. And out of that, often that's a kind of entry point for people. Then this kind of murmuring and whispering can begin to take shape. So that would be like, and then as we get deeper into the process, then the vocal cords can have a little more engagement. So just let me put those together from breath to whispering,
Yes,
murmuring,
please.
and see what comes through as you and I are in this field together. Imakuna, imaku ehiyakuna se. Hala, hala. Inaye manakuna desiaye. Alnaku, alnaku. Iya. Shede, shede. Sedeka.
Wow. That was, I'm able to receive that right in my heart center. It doesn't, it like completely bypasses my mind and my need to like understand it, but I'm able to receive that so fully. I need to ask you this because you don't ever talk about being a channel or being, channeling, but to me, that's what you just did. Orchestrated spirit guides, whatever you want to call it, but that's they just flew through you and created that within you. What do you feel or think about that?
Well, I think the tradition of composing and improvising really comes from that very place of opening to something larger than self, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think of there's the small self, the egoic self, but there's this larger self, and that self, in my um, operating premise, is connected to a larger soul, or we tend to use words like the great mystery or the muses. So when I think about classical composers, um, often they would sit down with this kind of blank canvas, knowing that they had to create a piece for some special occasion, and opening themselves those first rushes of a melody, of something that was inspired, would come through. But then you think about jazz musicians and blues musicians and even pop artists, that there is a kind of availability that they create. Some people will be woken up in the middle of the night and have a song or a lyric that appears to them and try to
Right.
capture it on some device. Um, but I do think the act of improvisation puts individuals in that context where their personal soul is connected to a larger soul. And in her book, Big Magic, I forget that Julia Cameron uh, talks about this very act, that you have to indicate to those powers that you're available, that you're going to be attentive and in concert with them, that you will be a means through which something special and unique will emerge. And as she points out, if you don't do that, that project process creation is going to find somebody else that it comes through, right?
Right. Yeah,
It's not
for
gonna,
sure.
just going to go away. That medicine is going to find another medium.
Yeah, exactly. It's because it needs to express and create, and so it's looking for light portals to go into and to be able to express and create. That's so cool. And I feel like, as somebody who channels, I can witness it in people. So when I watch, like I've watched you perform many, many times, and this summer got a chance to see you live. And when I watch, I can see spirit, animating, right? Coming in there and giving that animation. And I feel like, so many people spend such a big part of their journey being, in search of connection and their intuition. And is there something bigger than myself? I feel like it's easy to miss those moments where you are channeling, you are connected. That is your intuition. And I feel like a lot of people don't give it as much credit or acclamations as they should. And I wonder if they did, if they like let ego, like you said, instead of am I sounding right, is my pitch good, are these lyrics great, are they going to receive them, if you can like get all that off to the side and just be like, okay, let's go, then I think that's when we get like a masters among us, right, through the creating through the music scene.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that the challenge in that is that the academic or formal training of, say, a music therapist, and they do great work. I don't mean to belittle, but it does tend to follow prescriptive processes. So if you're working with a patient with aphasia, this is what you would do.
Right.
And so as efficient as that has been, it often kind of eclipses that state of not knowing, of just being in the moment and not knowing how to respond, how to serve, which I think is really the state of just being available for magic to take place,
Right.
for something really special and almost tailored for that instant to happen. And so it's um, it's a request often of the individual to hold that place of not knowing, of not bringing in all your experience and your teachings and ladening the moment with stuff
Right.
instead to maybe just pause, to be still, and I know you get this, to listen to something further upstream. And what is that asking of us? What is that guiding us or directing us to do? And then we're in service in two different ways. We're in service to the person or the grouping that's before us, but we're in service to something larger that wants to put us to work, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that we do, I have known musical therapists and art therapists and, through the years of working in the industry that I work in. And I hope that some of them are listening to you now and having, being able to give themselves that permission to say, okay, yes, I have all these degrees and all of these diplomas on my walls, and I can give you exactly what we're supposed to be doing. But how about if I do what Gary just said and I like just pull back and like let a higher intelligence, a bigger energy come through and then show up for my patients, my clients in the way that they need it and not in the way that I think they need it, right?
Right. Yeah, and sometimes the deeper into the arts that a person is, that sometimes can be a stumbling block.
Right.
Um, I did an event at the University of Toronto. I was the curator for this gathering, and I wanted the finale to have some really special musical moments. So I invited a friend who plays cello in the Boston Symphony Orchestra. So the Boston Symphony Orchestra
A big
is,
deal. Yeah.
yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
And so I picked her up at the airport and we're driving in, and she says to me, you and I both know, Gary, that I can read just about anything you put in front of me,
Right.
um, but I would like to look over the score before we rehearse. And
Right.
I'm thinking, I must have miscommunicated what I'm really
Right.
asking of this person. And so as we're driving down the 401, I'm explaining that no, it's going to be really an improvisational sharing with the group of people who are gathered, that
Yeah.
we're really going to trust the moment, trust our musical intelligence.
Right.
I didn't imply that we're going to trust something
Right.
not, but she was terrified.
Yeah.
And she refused to play unless she was positioned up in the balcony of Convocation Hall, which turned out to be absolutely brilliant because that facility has this domed kind of roof. And so up there playing her cello, it was like the sounds were just cascading
Oh, wow.
over everyone. And of course, she played beautifully. But the point being that for classically trained or formally trained musicians, sometimes that act of just being a tabula rasa, a blank slate, is terrifying compared to somebody who really just wants to add their voice or wants to add some musical expression to the moment
Yeah.
and no reservation about that. Just it's coming from a place of intention, a place of trust, and somewhat of a risk, just
Yeah.
going to the edge and saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm curious as to what might happen if I just make myself present.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that's part of, I feel like that is part of the deep programming that we get into, right? That, the more you know, the more the more stacks of papers that you have in front of you means you're more intelligent, but energetically what all that does is it puts up like these boundaries for us, right? Like it creates these obstacles that things like your intuition and allowing things to create and flow through you makes it even harder, right? For sure.
Yes, and I think when we're living through these times as we are, where there are storms in nature and storms in culture, um, we have to come to that acceptance that all our smarts are not going to get us through this. We've got the most brilliant, educated individuals on the planet looking at ecological and financial and cultural difficulties, but it's bigger than all that, right? I feel that the tough stuff that we're dealing with in these times is hopefully nudging us to a place where we can't solve this individually. We can't solve that collectively because we're kind of working on the same plateau from which whence all these circumstances were created. So
Hmm.
that horizontal conundrum is begging for something of a more vertical orientation.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
uh,
Yeah, spirit often will call it the big picture for me. So when I'm, the idea of, and it's interesting because, as being somebody who reads energy for a living, when I tune into somebody, the very first thing I notice is their energy, their frequency. It's not how what they look like and what they're wearing and any of that. And when I've met very influential people, that are politics or they're, in places of power, there is this, and for lack of a better word, there's a daftness about them. Right? It's like there's like this dummied down, right? That you don't, so when I talk to you as an example, there is this vastness about you. So I can literally feel energies constantly flowing and moving through you. And I know that if we had people like that as our leaders, as our protectors, as our creators, we would be much better off, right? Instead of having these very dense, daft people that need to, do healing. They need to be healed. That's what needs to happen.
yeah. I've been fascinated with this theme in that regard, Jody, of the distinction between fate and destiny. So, the word fate we often hear in terms of fatal or fatalities. It comes from that older sense of something gone awry. And I often feel that the fatalistic stuff that comes our way in terms of circumstances and problems and illness and whatnot um, can be part of a process to kind of strip us down, take us down to the marrow, so that we're much more open and therefore possibly attuned to destiny, which the root of that word is tied more to the stars. The
Yeah.
sense of there is some kind of larger universal picture that wants to come through uniquely through us, right?
Hmm.
So when we feel dense, when we feel dumbed down in that regard, some part of ourself might get nudged to sources of wisdom, sources of understanding that don't come from kind of absorbing, as you implied, consuming just knowledge,
Right.
information, right?
Yeah. And I love that, and I love that you understand that fully, because when people speak to me, every single word carries a vibration, and the vibrational energy of the word fate is very, very enclosing. It's very, we're putting you in the box. This is how it goes. It right. And opposite of being the, the destiny, it's very free flowing. It's very open. It's very, this is why when we're consciously choosing the things that we are bringing into our energies, music choices, book choices, conversations, if we feel into it and be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to choose that light, fluffier thing now. I'm going to bring in some more of that because I need some flow, right? Rather than, oh, I'm stuck on that person talking about what's going on. You can feel the shift in your gravitational pull, right?
Yes. Yes. I had a vivid example of that last evening. I was in Hamilton in a studio where probably about 20 people were stretched out on yoga mats, and the offering was a 90-minute music as medicine experience for them. So typically, just like I demonstrated with the vocables, I would often do something kind of soft and ambient at the beginning to kind of put people in a state of receptivity. Uh, Too much, too loud, too soon, kind of has this activation of the adrenal glands and other biochemicals, and next thing you know, people are a little tensed up.
Right.
But you would get this. There's a way that you can read the room, as it were, read the collective energy, and respond to that in a way that you're being inspired to do. So rather than something kind of genteel, I heard or felt this nudge coming through to say, start with the didgeridoo. And the didgeridoo is this primordial sound, one of the oldest monophonic instruments on the planet, really pioneered by the Aboriginal people of Australia, part of their mythology about dream time and constantly uh, creating the world, not it happened and we're just living now in the manifestation of that. So so I began with this didgeridoo that filled the room with a kind of almost animalistic sound, the way you can play it. And I went around and played over and into the individuals that were in that state of receptivity. And in retrospect, thinking about it now with you, um, I feel like it was an invitation, or could have been an invitation, to step out of contemporary times and all our concerns about, oh, did I leave the pot boiling on the
Right.
stove or whatever? Kind of brought them back to this state of the beginning of life, because so many of the mythologies of the world say the world was sounded into being, not a Brahma. It was a drum was struck, a voice was sounded, something happened that set this kind of vibrational pattern in motion, and that's what the didgeridoo can do, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I could actually get one and
Yeah,
you
absolutely. That
like
would
one
be,
second. I've
yeah.
got everything packed up in my car for an engagement, but I think I have one lying around.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I'll just talk while Gary's going and grabbing it for us. But so to me, that vibration that comes through with that is very grounding, right? It's very connecting you to the earth, that kind of anchoring, which I feel like a lot of us lack that anchoring, especially when we're on our devices and on our right. So that deep vibrational energy that comes through with that grounds us. But it's very interesting because spirit's also showing me that it also shakes up it, because it's so powerful and strong. It has the ability to go in there and shake things up, which, just like, if you were shaking your sheets out or fluffing your pillow out, it creates that space, right? It creates that space within us. So yes,
Mhm.
please give us a sample of that so we can feel some lightness in our being.
Just a little,
Oh wow.
yes, so this is a non-traditional didgeridoo. When I was working with a project based at Hebrew University, bringing together um, Palestinian adolescents with young men in Jerusalem. And so while I was there, I met this artisan who had created what he calls a didgeum. And I think what I probably ought to do here, there's a little Zoom has kindly put this original sound for musicians off or on. I'm going to turn it to on, so hopefully the sound of this will come through it in a clearer way. So just give me a moment here. There we go. So,
Very cool. Very, very cool. Insert the applause. That was amazing. And I invite our listeners, when you guys listen to this, when he's doing that, go back and listen to it again and notice where you like feel it in your body. Because for me, I felt it right in the back of my head, right up into a couple places in my body where it's been like feeling a little stuck, a little stagnant.
hmm.
That came right in there and like just shook things up. And then I found myself like chuckling, like laughing. So like that's very, very cool. And spirit right now is like lighting me up with goosebumps. That's how, so I love that. That was so cool.
I feel that poetry can be heard on so many different octaves, right? Like one day you might read something of Rumi and it lands a certain way with us. The next day it has a completely different shade or nuance of relevancy. And I feel instruments are shapeshifters that way. So I loved hearing how it landed with you today. And then perhaps re listening to this, you might have a completely different experience. It's as if the sound has, it lives for the moment, but certainly with the advent of recording sound, it can then have a life longer than just the here and now.
Yeah. And depending on where you are in the resonance, right? Where it's picking up the stuff that is the same frequency and then also kind of dispelling the stuff that you don't need, which is, I love that ability of it for sure. That's so cool. I need to go back because they're just showing me this. So there's going to be a teaching in this. When you discovered the shaman, the Colombian shaman, tell me about like where you were, where something needed to be shifted or changed for you specifically, and how and what you used to kind of move things for you.
Good question. Yeah. Um, So the baggage that I brought to the initial meeting um, had a lot to do with my musical training, right? So I thought of myself as a schooled, trained musician. But the gathering, which was just maybe half a dozen or so of us, in this darkened room involved percussion instruments and a kind of approach to playing music almost like Baroque music, you know, how it all interweaves, but doing that from a percussion standpoint where all the parts were fitting together, not only to make something musically beautiful or rhythmic, but rather to engender this entranced state. I've subsequently learned that ethnomusicologists and people who are studying the neurology of music and our response, the brain's response to music, have indicated that in order to enter a non-ordinary state, uh, repetitive rhythms and sounds have to exist over an arc of a minimum of 10 minutes, right?
Right.
So if you think about pop music, I mean, it's like 3.5
3 minute
minutes,
song. Yeah. Yeah.
4 minutes long. So what I needed to be able to do was not only learn an instrument that was unfamiliar to me at that time, so I had to listen to what I was bringing. I had to listen to the ensemble that was beginning to form. I had to hold my part as best as I could. And then the the thing that switched me or puzzled me or entranced me was the fact that this shaman was then playing in a way that seemed to be out of time. So this was a really precise version of playing in time, and he was messing with our sense of time, like pulling it and speeding it up. And my response to that was to activate my imagination. I saw myself running along this path, and every time he did something, it was like I was jumping over a log, or I was running in a different way, or sometimes he would slow things down, and I felt like I was running in a dream state.
Right.
And to the point where instead of running on ground, I started to elevate and I felt myself flying.
Wow.
Now, I like this just absolutely was something so far from my so-called normal experience that it snagged me. It said there is an understanding from older cultures that I have not been privy to, and it doesn't matter how much Royal Conservatory training I've had, this is not going to show
Right.
up in any of that kind of education. So it humbled me in the best sense. You
Yeah.
know, it said there's an understanding that's different than training.
Right.
Um, that there is this kind of spiritual practice that was oddly enough familiar but not familiar. It kind of
Right.
awakened a sense that, like you were saying about vocables the first time you heard that, like there's a connect.
Mm-hmm.
This is this is something I know in my
Something
bones,
familiar. Yeah.
know in my head. I
Yes.
don't know how to even continue on with this. So that, Jody, was the turning point to realize that um, what we think of as music in the West is a very small sliver of a larger pie that dates back to the earliest humans. And so, if anything, we should think of ourselves as new kids on the block in that
Right.
regard, right?
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, that really kind of steered me toward um, seeking out teachers in that regard to understand as much as I could from their culture, and rather than a cultural appropriation, to make it clear to them that what I wanted to do was to bring ceremonial practices, ritual practices, and the use of sound, intentional sound, into my calling, right?
Hmm.
It would look different than a village in Africa. It would look different than an Aboriginal a corroboree. It would look different than a shaman in South America conducting a ceremony, right?
Right.
So I feel that as we interact with these older cultures, it's really important to come from that place of um, being the sorcerer's apprentice, right?
Right.
To kind of bend the knee and whatever they feel comfortable sharing, to accept that in a respectful way and find ways to integrate that in a way that's natural to each of us.
Yeah, I love that so you following your calling and needing all of that foundational, because obviously you sound brilliant about music knowledge and all, academics of it. So having that base, but then having the awareness of like, okay, so my interpretation, everything's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to follow my kind of flow. And it served you well. And I love that you brought this up because they're just showing this was an example I with a mentorship student that I had. And she had connections to, an Aboriginal training, right? She was um, native, Canadian native, and we were we were teaching, I was teaching her, mediumship, psychic development, and there were many aspects where she would go, oh, but the elders say we shouldn't do that because it's outside of that ceremony, or we shouldn't. And I just kept on getting, spirit coming through and saying, but it's now time to change it a bit. It's now time to bend it in the way, mold it in the way that it's a new time for healers, right?
Yeah, I do think that there is that adaptation to the times. So, for instance, in West African music, women didn't play the djembe from places like Mali and Senegal, and women certainly didn't play the kora, which is that kind of harp-like instrument. But now, some of the most amazing artists are the women who have reclaimed those instruments. And I do think that there's things are changing for everyone, right? They're
Hmm.
not just changing for us contemporary modern people. I think there are pushbacks and challenges so that we're all in this time of transformation and transition together, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a really important part of, the work that you do is that helping us to get out of the mind space, to get out of in the summertime, Gary was at a music festival, the Coming Home Festival. If you guys check that out, because it was great. It happens here in Southern Ontario. And I actually got to sit on for a drumming circle. There was Tom Wolfe was teaching the drumming circle. I'd never even touched a drum before. And so it was very interesting because he was teaching us, the things to, and I found myself really struggling And this is interesting because, for somebody who prides themselves on being able to like get out of the mind space, allow spirit to come through and channel, when I had this instrument between my legs and I was like having to follow the teacher and do the exact thing that the teacher wanted me to do, my left and right brain was going, no, this isn't working. And so I found exactly what you said. I had to be like, you can't think while you're doing this. This cannot be a I'm doing this right, I'm doing this wrong. It has to be just like flowing. And as soon as I did that, there was like this, oh, like this, right? That came through.
Yeah, I think the parallel for me would be um, movement. So if somebody says, "Let's go to a dance workshop," some part of me goes, "Hmm." But if
Right.
somebody says, "Let's go to a movement session," that's a whole different thing, right? Because for me, that would say I can move as I might want to in the moment, and there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm taking salsa lessons, it's, a very
Right. Let's be exact.
different part of me. And
Yeah.
so I do think the expressive arts really allow both practitioners and clients that kind of liberty to discover something that isn't so much in our heads, that comes from a different place. There's an invitation to say, just move to that edge and trust that something in you will jump in the river and find flow, right?
Right. Yeah.
So creating space for that is both an invitation to safe space, that there's no judgment,
Yeah.
there's no right or wrong, but it's also an invitation to a risky space where you have to go beyond what maybe even feels comfortable for you in order to discover some new depth or some new expression that's been dormant.
Yeah. And that's so healing, because I feel like every move we make, like, through life, how we stand, how we take things, do things, it's very much in the mind of like, this is how it has to look and this is how it has to feel. And there becomes that rigidness that sets in, right? That lack of flexibility. And so I feel like all of us could really benefit from showing up in a space that Gary's holding, and Gary having that huge capacity to hold space, right? With no judgment, very compassionate, very opening, for us to be able to come into that space and go, okay, so we're just going to allow, we're just going to, yeah, for sure. So tell me, what are some of the things that you have actively going on right now where people can connect with you and they can experience this very powerful healing?
Ah. Um, this Saturday is a very special time for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. It's the solstice period.
Right.
It's a time of the delicious dark, as I like to think of it. We often want to banish the dark so that we can return to light. But I do feel there's something really womb-like that asks us to be in the deliciousness of the dark. So I'm hosting at the University of Guelph on Saturday something called the Big Beat. And it is a communal gathering. It's interactive. There are three components to it. One is dancing. So there's a group of musicians who I feel like in conversation with the dancers who are all listening to what wants to happen in the moment. Sometimes there are group vocals that just emerge.
Right.
Then the second section, dancing, drumming, is led by Tom Wolfe, and he creates this wonderful invitational space for us to explore rhythm, and those who want to continue to move can do so. And then the final phase is called dreaming, and so that's more like what I described last night with people lying out on the floor and a grouping of sound work practitioners making sound again in that improvisational spirit. around and over individuals. So I tend to host those kinds of gatherings on a regular basis. Um, I am probably the award-winning individual who has the most outdated website on the planet. Just there's some part of me that hasn't quite plugged into that. So I have a web designer who's going to help me just post and recreate my offerings. So give me a couple of weeks in the new year. Check in, and there will be offerings that look like the following. Once a month, I host up here in the Beaver Valley area, which is near Meaford, Ontario. I host something called Sonica Sunday, and it's a gathering of people really in the spirit of nurturing one another through sound. I host 1 day sound work trainings that are often pivoting around a theme. The one that's coming up in January is called Sonica Rhythmica. So it's talking about what I described, not just talking about, but really experiencing what I described of my interactions with that shaman. How can we use vocal and percussive rhythm to help us enter that kind of non-ordinary or entranced state? So each month there's a different theme. Uh, in addition to that, yeah, I would encourage people if they live further afield and they can't uh, connect. This latest book is really based on the notion of what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, but I'm calling it more the liminal traveler's journey. It's about the stages of transition that are common to many of us and how expressive arts practices can help us in those difficult times.
That's awesome. And you can I looked, so it is available on Amazon. You can get it in the Kindle and you can get it in the paperback. And some of your other books came up there as well. So I've ordered them. So
Lovely.
I'll have them on. I have this. I'm just wondering if it's ever come up for you, or maybe it will come up for you. But the possibility of you doing this stuff, this healing, the online though. So one of the greatest gifts of COVID for me was my business. I had a wellness center in a small town, Shelburne, Ontario, and people would come from like hours away to come and do the readings and stuff. But COVID came and my whole office closed and everything went online. And now I have people that come from Poland and Australia and New Zealand and like all over. So Gary, have you thought about doing like this stuff? Because
I've been such a resistor up until recently
yeah,
because the technology, as I was saying earlier, has been a little unkind for music. It's great for the human voice, and your voice, by the way, is really coming through loud and clear. But it's only been in the last little while that I think there have been adaptations, especially to platforms like Zoom, that enable the sound quality to come through. And so, yes would be the answer. That's my commitment in the year 2025 is to begin to offer more sessions online. We had a huge dump of snow for the past 2 weeks here, and it's problematic for people to come up here.
yeah.
So sitting in my sound sanctuary is a much better way to then share this work with others. So yes, it's coming.
Yay, that's awesome. And because here's the thing for, somebody who's kind of maybe new to allowing themselves to step outside of their comfort zone, right? Maybe they're not comfortable enough to show up at, a group outing where everybody's moving and dancing. Often so for somebody like myself, so I'm an empath, I'm energetically sensitive. I often don't go to those group gatherings because the energy of everybody there is just too much for me. I
Mm.
can go in and come out, and especially if it's outside, then I'm okay. It's a little bit better. But if it's indoors, it's too much for me energetically, and then I don't get the benefits of, the sound healing. So if you were to do something like this online and from the comfort of my own sanctuary,
Mhm.
right? Because it's, it's very cool how, several times when you played the instrument and did the light language, it, I can feel it. It comes through. It's very powerful. So, yeah, I would encourage this. If you need any help in, setting up the technical aspect of it, I'm your girl. I'll help you with that. But
Jodi?
being able to reach so many people, I think would be amazing for, and it's just saying allowing people to comfortably come out of their comfort zone, right? Because I could just shut my camera off and you could instruct, and I can move and allow my body to, and not have to worry about there's eyes on me and how I'm, right?
Very good point. Yeah, I really appreciate your encouragement and support for that. Yes. So
Yeah. And I
everything
feel
in,
like it's just such a natural way of healing. It's so non-invasive, and it's not like there's the thing about using frequency for healing to me is that because it comes through such a pure source, right? When you're bringing it through, the body takes what it needs and it leaves the rest. So you're not ever having too much of something or not enough of something. It's just always kind of like that right blend, which is very cool. Yeah. And it's not always
yeah.
like
When I
that
was a
when you,
young man, just continuing.
yeah.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the San people of Southern Africa. They are sometimes known as the Bushmen, and they, being a nomadic people, the question comes up, how do they care for somebody when they're unwell? And a doctor friend of mine went over there and witnessed how, not every night, but on certain occasions when the energies are right, a few will start to form a circle, and they do this kind of spontaneous movement, and they're actually pulling up energy from the earth. And then they start this kind of rocking motion and sounds, and then it begins to move through their hands so
Hmm.
that they're charged. You would understand this implicitly. They become a vessel for healing energy to begin to move through them, and they pass that on to anybody who is in need. And so I think of that relative to um, time and space, that one of the shifts that has to happen for me is to get beyond that sense that we have to be gathered in a specific
Right.
place at a specific time, but instead to kind of open it up to say that wherever we are, we're participating, just as your viewers, listeners will be doing. Uh,
Hmm.
they're then partaking in something that is emerging, unfolding now, but will have relevance hopefully in another time and space.
Absolutely. So everybody will be experiencing it in the same degree we are now, but at various times,
Yeah, there you
which
go.
then goes to, Spirit is always saying there's no such thing as time or space. So it's something we need to remind ourselves about the relevance of me opening up and sending energy to you now. 10 hours from now, when you come back and watch the recording of it, that energy is still there. It's still in that space activating and moving,
Yeah. Wow.
which is very cool. Yeah. So I definitely look forward to, I will make sure that I have all Gary's contact information, I guess, which will be his website. So we could go really old school and leave your cell phone number for everybody, Gary.
There we go.
Yeah, we'll get you to work on the website so that so we'll have the website
Now,
up.
yeah, just send my email and I'll put you on the mailing list because I do a regular list of calendar of events, things that are coming out.
That's very
Yeah.
cool. And I feel like everybody, we're going to be coming into the new year. I think 2025 is going to be very different vibrationally than it has been for the last 5 years. So I
Ah,
feel like more of us are going to be seeking, you know, I hate the word alternative, but alternative sources for healing. Yeah. And I feel like
mhm.
there's,
Yeah.
you have a great wealth to be able to offer to everybody. So I'm so glad that you came and we got a chance to do this. And I'm telling you, if you start a light language program or a course, I'm going to sign up. I'll be your first student that comes into that.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed our interchange, and as we both know, we've been in certain circles together, but this gave us an opportunity to dive in a different kind of way.
Yeah. I love this. And your energy is wonderful. So I love spending time with that. That's beautiful. Okay, so we definitely will have you back at some point, and maybe there's more light language stuff that you can do, and you can bring in some other instruments, and maybe we'll like use the podcast as its like first platform of here's Gary sending healing to everybody.
I like that
You
notion.
never know. You never know how spirit comes in and then starts to intermingle us together. So it's very cool.
Well, blessings.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend, and we will talk to you soon. We'll take care. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And I'll make sure that Gary's information is there so you know what he's doing in the new year and you can be part of the stuff that he's doing. Thanks,
Well,
Gary. We'll talk to you soon.
ciao for now. Lots of love.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Collective Soulversations podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we hope that you found our chat both inspiring and thought provoking. Your support means everything to us, and we're excited to keep this journey going with you. So make sure that you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to leave us a review and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us grow and connect with more wonderful listeners like you. Until next time, stay curious and keep those soulversations flowing.